I want to be upfront with you right now. I've spent a lot of years in this garden making the exact same mistake you're probably making today. And it cost me 2 full growing seasons before I figured out what was actually going on. I'd walk out every morning, see my tomatoes, my roses, my pepper plants covered in these tiny green and black clusters. I'd grab whatever spray was on the shelf at the hardware store: neem oil, insecticidal soap, pyrethrin-based stuff, spray everything down, feel good about myself for about 4 days, and then watch the whole thing come back like I'd done absolutely nothing. And I mean nothing. Same plants, same clusters, same damage. I must have spent close to $200 across 2 seasons trying to solve what I thought was a pest problem. Turns out I was treating the symptom while the actual cause was walking around my garden in plain sight, completely ignored, completely untreated, doing exactly what it wanted. The cause was ants, not aphids, ants. And here's the idea that changed everything for me. The one I want you to hold on to for this entire video. You don't have an aphid problem. You have an ant problem that looks like an aphid problem. Once that clicks, everything else makes sense. Every failed spray, every product that worked for a week and then stopped, every infestation that came back stronger than before, it all traces back to that one misunderstanding. So, here's what we're going to cover today. First, I'm going to show you what ants are actually doing in your garden underground and why it's a lot more destructive than most people realize. Second, I'm going to explain the ant-aphid relationship in enough detail that you'll never look at either insect the same way again. Third, I'm going to show you the material that solves both problems simultaneously. Something that costs almost nothing, that you can find at most feed stores or online for a few dollars, and that works through a mechanism that insects literally cannot evolve to resist. And at the end, I've got a specific application detail for indoors that most people completely miss the first time they try this. And missing it is the reason they think it doesn't work. Let's start underground, because that's where the real damage begins. Most people think of ants as a surface problem. You see them walking across your patio, climbing up a stem, disappearing into a crack in the soil. What you don't see is what they've been building underneath that soil for weeks or months before you notice them on the surface. A mature ant colony excavates tunnel systems that can reach depths of nearly 2 meters and spread several square meters in every direction from the central nest. These aren't random holes. They're engineered structures with chambers for food storage, temperature regulation, and brood development. The engineering is genuinely impressive if you're not the one trying to grow food in that soil. But from your plant's perspective, that engineering is a slow-motion catastrophe playing out in the root zone. The first form of damage is moisture loss. Those tunnels create air channels that run directly alongside and beneath your root systems. Wherever there's an open tunnel near a root, the surrounding soil dries out significantly faster than it would in undisturbed ground. You water your garden in the evening. By the next afternoon, the soil around certain plants feels bone dry in a way that doesn't match how much water you put in. That inconsistency isn't your imagination. It's ant tunnels accelerating evaporation, right where your roots need moisture most. The second form of damage is root destabilization. Ants excavate around and beneath root systems, which creates air pockets between the roots and the soil. A root suspended in an air pocket cannot absorb water or nutrients. Doesn't matter how moist the surrounding soil is. Doesn't matter how much fertilizer you've added. The root needs physical contact with soil particles to do its job. When that contact is broken, the plant shows symptoms that look exactly like drought stress or nutrient deficiency. You water more. You add fertilizer. Nothing helps. Because the problem isn't what's in the soil. It's the empty space the ants put between the soil and the roots. The third form of damage is pathogen transport. Ants move constantly between different areas of your garden, carrying fragments of fungal material, bacteria, and insect eggs through their tunnel networks and depositing them in new locations. Research from the University of Florida's entomology department has documented ants as vectors for several plant pathogens, including fungal species that cause root rot and crown disease. They are, in a very real sense, spreading contamination from sick plants to healthy ones every single day. But the fourth form of damage is the one that brought you to this video in the first place. Aphids. Drop a 1 or a 2 in the comments right now. 1 if you've been dealing with aphids and didn't know ants were involved. 2 if you already suspected the connection. I'm genuinely curious how many people watching this have been fighting the wrong battle. The relationship between ants and aphids is one of the most well-documented examples of mutualistic behavior in entomology. It's been studied extensively. The University of Vienna published research on this dynamic going back decades, and the picture that emerges is remarkable in how sophisticated it actually is. Aphids feed by inserting a stylet, essentially a biological needle, into plant tissue and drawing out phloem sap. As a byproduct of digesting that sap, they excrete a sugar-rich liquid called honeydew. For ants, honeydew is a high-value food source, and once ants discover a colony of aphids producing honeydew, they don't just eat it and leave, they manage it. What does managing an aphid colony actually look like? The research is specific, and it's worth going through piece by piece. Ants actively drive away ladybugs, the most efficient natural predator of aphids in most temperate gardens. A single 7-spot ladybug can consume up to 50 aphids per day according to data from the Royal Horticultural Society. Ants chase them off before they can feed. They also attack parasitoid wasps that would otherwise inject eggs into aphids, disrupting the aphid population from inside. Any predator that approaches an ant-managed aphid colony gets intercepted. Beyond defense, ants physically relocate aphid groups to fresh plant tissue. When a section of stem or leaf becomes exhausted, they carry aphids, actual individuals, to new growth, extending the infestation to parts of the plant that hadn't been reached yet. Some ant species have been documented building small soil shelters around the base of infested stems, protecting the lower portions of the aphid colony from ground-level threats. Here is the number that puts this in perspective. A study published in the journal Ecological Entomology found that aphid colonies under ant protection persisted on average 4 to 5 times longer than unprotected colonies in comparable conditions. An aphid infestation that your garden's natural biodiversity would resolve in 2 to 3 weeks on its own can persist for an entire growing season under ant management. So, when you spray for aphids and they come back in a week, it's not that the spray didn't work. It's that the ants brought them back. You cleared the symptom. The infrastructure that produces the symptom was never touched. This is the whole game. You're not going to solve an aphid problem by treating aphids. You solve it by removing the ant colony's ability to operate in that area. And that brings me to the material. Diatomaceous earth. If you've never encountered this before, give me 3 minutes, because this is one of those things that once you understand the mechanism, you'll wonder why it isn't the first thing everyone reaches for. Diatomaceous earth is a naturally occurring powder made from the fossilized remains of diatoms, single-celled aquatic algae that lived millions of years ago. When these organisms died, their silica-based cell walls accumulated in lake and ocean sediments and compressed into what we now mine and process into this fine white powder. The particles range from about 10 to 200 microns in size. Under a scanning electron microscope, each particle looks like a fragment of shattered glass. Irregular, angular, with sharp edges on every surface. For mammals, including humans, this material is essentially inert. Food-grade diatomaceous earth is approved by the FDA as a substance that can be present in grain storage. You can handle it with bare hands. The particle size is too large to penetrate deep lung tissue when used normally in a household context. For an insect with a thin, waxy exoskeleton, it's a different situation entirely. When an ant walks through diatomaceous earth, the particles physically abrade the epicuticular wax layer that covers the exoskeleton. That wax layer is not decorative. It's the primary barrier that prevents the insect from losing body moisture to the environment. The CDC's documentation on integrated pest management describes this mechanism clearly. Once that wax layer is compromised, the insect begins losing water through its cuticle at a rate it cannot compensate for. Depending on temperature and ambient humidity, the process takes between 2 and 16 hours. It is irreversible. Now here is the critical distinction between this and every chemical insecticide on the market. The mechanism is physical, not chemical, not biological. This means two things that matter enormously in practice. First, insects cannot develop resistance to it. Resistance to pesticides develops through natural selection. Individuals with genetic traits that allow them to survive a chemical exposure reproduce, and over generations, the population shifts toward resistance. The EPA has documented resistance development in dozens of insect species to dozens of chemical compounds. There is no parallel pathway for resistance to physical abrasion. You cannot evolve an exoskeleton that is immune to being cut. The diatomaceous earth that works today will work at the same efficacy in 30 years. Second, there is no toxic residual in your soil. Diatomaceous earth is silicon dioxide. Chemically, it's extremely fine sand. It does not leach into groundwater. It does not accumulate in plant tissue. Research from the Rodale Institute has confirmed it does not harm earthworms because earthworms have a mucus layer thick enough to prevent the abrasive effect. You are not trading one problem for another when you use this material. You are adding a permanent, non-degrading physical barrier that costs a few dollars per application. But there is one application detail that determines whether this material actually eliminates your ant problem or just redirects it. And almost everyone gets this wrong the first time. Do not apply diatomaceous earth directly into the ant colony entrance. I did this the first time. It feels intuitive. You found the nest. You want to treat the source. You pour the material in. It doesn't work. The underground environment is humid enough to neutralize the material almost immediately, and ants don't spend their time sitting at the entrance. The mechanism only works on ants in motion on a dry surface. Diatomaceous earth works as a contact barrier. It needs to be placed where ants walk above ground. Here's the protocol that actually works, step by step. Step 1. Before you apply anything, spend 5 minutes observing. Ants operate on pheromone trails, chemical paths laid down by scout ants and reinforced by every ant that follows. Once a trail is established, the entire colony follows it with remarkable consistency. You will see this as a visible line of ants moving in both directions along the same path. Find those trails. That's your target. Step 2. Apply a continuous, unbroken line of diatomaceous earth crossing each trail you've identified. The layer doesn't need to be thick. A thin, even application is more effective than a pile. Because a pile creates a physical obstacle, the ants will root around rather than walk through. What you need is an unavoidable line of contact across the full width of the trail. Step 3. Create a ring around the base of every plant that ants are visiting. This ring prevents trunk access, which cuts off the ant's ability to reach and manage the aphid colonies in the foliage above. No access to the trunk means no access to the aphids. Without ant protection, the aphid colony becomes vulnerable to every natural predator your garden has. Step 4. This is the one people skip. Reapply after any rain or overhead irrigation. Water causes the particles to clump together, which blunts the sharp edges and reduces contact efficacy. The material partially recovers as it dries, but a fresh thin application over dried residue is always more effective than relying on what's left. If you applied the material, had a rainstorm, and concluded it doesn't work, this is why. reapply on dry material after the soil surface dries out. Step 5. Once your surface trails are treated and your plant bases are ringed, then apply material around, not inside, the colony entrance. Create a treated zone around the opening so that every ant exiting or entering the nest crosses the material. Combined with the trail barriers, this creates a situation where the ant colony is taking losses on every foraging run it makes. Now let me give you the indoor application, because the same material solves indoor ant problems with even better results. And the reason is straightforward. Indoors, there's no rain, no irrigation, no weather. A single application of diatomaceous earth along baseboards, under appliances, around pipe penetrations, and along window and door frames can remain effective for weeks without reapplication. The ants enter through whatever crack or gap they've been using, follow their pheromone trail to the food source, walk across the treated surface on the way in or out, and return to the colony. Death follows within hours to a day depending on conditions. There's an additional effect worth knowing about. Ants engage in allogrooming. They clean each other. Research from the University of Regensburg on social insect behavior has documented that particles picked up on the body surface of one ant get transferred to nestmates during grooming. This means diatomaceous earth spreads through the colony contact network beyond just the individuals who walked directly through the treated zone. You're not just treating the ants you can see. You're introducing an abrasive agent into the colony's social grooming system. For indoor application, dust a thin line along every baseboard in affected rooms, a thin layer under the refrigerator, stove and dishwasher, along the back edge of cabinet shelves where ants have been observed, around any pipe that penetrates a wall or floor, and along the threshold of any exterior door. Thin and even, not visible piles. The goal is contact, not obstacle. One more thing before we close, and this is non-negotiable. Use food-grade diatomaceous earth only, not pool grade, not filter grade. The product sold for swimming pool filtration has been processed at high heat, which transforms the silica into a crystalline form called cristobalite. Crystalline silica in that particle size range is a documented respiratory hazard. It's the compound associated with silicosis in industrial workers. Food-grade diatomaceous earth retains the amorphous silica structure, which does not carry that respiratory risk at normal household exposure levels. The bag will say food grade or food grade DE. If it doesn't say that specifically, don't use it indoors or around children and pets. So let's close the loop on where we started. You came into this video thinking you had an aphid problem. What you actually have is an ant operation running in your garden that is cultivating, protecting, and managing those aphids as a food source. Underneath the soil, those same ants are drying out your root zone, creating air pockets that starve roots of contact with soil, and moving pathogens between plants. Every aphid treatment you apply addresses the output of that operation without touching the operation itself. Diatomaceous earth addresses the operation. It creates a physical barrier that ants cannot avoid, cannot root around if applied correctly, and cannot evolve resistance to. It does this without adding anything toxic to your soil, without harming your earthworms, without leaving residues on what you're growing. The same material, the same application logic, works in your garden and inside your house with no modification and no additional cost. When you see an ant trail in your garden tomorrow morning, you're not looking at an annoying inconvenience. You're looking at a pheromone highway waiting for a line of diatomaceous earth. You now know exactly what to do with it. If this reframed a problem you've been fighting for a while, hit the like button. It genuinely helps other people who are buying the wrong product for the wrong problem. Find this content instead, and drop a comment telling me where your ant situation is worst. Garden only, inside the house, or both at the same time. I want to know how many people are dealing with both environments simultaneously. Because that's exactly what the next video is going to cover. A complete protocol built specifically for households where the infestation is crossing from outside to inside. This is what I do. I find the stuff that actually works, and I share it straight. No fluff, no sales pitch. Thanks for spending time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.